The town had a name that no one quite remembered, not because it was difficult, but because over time people preferred not to speak of it. There was a short street, paved with cobblestones darkened by ancient rain, where shops with dusty windows huddled together. At the end of that street, a pale metal sign announced in peeling letters, "Dental Clinic, Dr. Henry Smiles." The facade was too clean. The glass shimmered without a smudge, and the doorbell rang with a tone that sounded like muffled laughter. People went there with the same mix of hope and fear, to pull a tooth, fix a brace, or finally end a pain that stole their sleep. Some left relieved, others sighed nervously, and some simply never reappeared. The disappearances began as whispers, spreading from street to street. A man who went in for a simple root canal, a teacher who booked a cleaning and never showed up for class again, a young woman who promised to bring a cake to her neighbors but vanished the morning after her appointment. At first it seemed like coincidence. Then the coincidence found a pattern. Everyone had passed through those glass doors. There was something unsettling about the office. The smell wasn't of antiseptic, but of mint and iron, as if the floors had been washed with bloodied water. On the walls, pictures of wide smiles seemed to follow the visitor. New patients complained that while sitting in the chair, the overhead light flickered at a frequency that made their teeth look like small boats adrift. Dr. Henry was always courteous. Tall, with dark eyes that shone as brightly as the street sign, he spoke in a calm tone that relaxed patients and made them forget their questions. He wore impeccable white gloves and a mask with a subtle, almost imperceptible embroidery, a symbol resembling a tooth with a spiraling mouth inside. When the first disappearance became public, the police knocked on his door. Dr. Henry offered coffee and a patient explanation. The patient had left early, hadn't checked out at the front desk. Perhaps they had forgotten an appointment. The investigation was formal, routine. Nothing linked the clinic to the void that had opened like a mouth that does not chew. The town sighed and returned to its routines, but the number of the missing continued to grow. Delivery men knew the schedules. On Tuesdays and Thursdays, just after lunch, the back chair was occupied by someone who, the moment the door closed, seemed to vanish from themselves. Rumors swirled that beneath the office lay a locked basement, that Dr. Henry dealt in the trafficking of silence, that the patients, for various reasons, were taken to another city. Anyone who poked around the stories was shooed away with politically correct smiles, and sometimes unexpected visits. A basket of bread at a neighbor's house, a kind note sent to a family, a memento that always smelled of mint. It was Lina who put an end to the indecision. Lina was a nurse, the radio of her house, and the memory of the entire street. She began to notice small traces, strands of hair caught in the sink drain, old scratches on the office floor that aligned like arrows, children's drawings on the wallpaper of the waiting room, scratched over until they formed a spiral. One day, while entering to look for her brother, who had scheduled a filling and hadn't come out, she noticed the receptionist's hands were trembling and the office door had shut with a dry thud. Lina asked to wait. Dr. Henry appeared, offering his usual smile, and said her brother had already left. When she reacted with disbelief, he stroked her arm with cold gloves and said, "Sometimes pain is an easy path. We give people what they seek, relief. And what is relief, if not surrender?" His tone was calm, but something about the word surrender made Lina recoil. That night, she returned with a flashlight and a courage that trembled deep inside. She waited for the poorly lit street to empty, for the last shops to close their shutters. The doorbell rang like an invitation, and the air behind the door smelled of metal and mint. The reception was empty. The swivel chair in the office sat vacant under the light, which hung like a cold moon. Beside the chair, a narrow staircase descended at an impossible angle. The basement door, when Lina opened it, groaned as if exhaling air that hadn't been breathed in a long time. What she found wasn't a torture chamber from a cheap horror movie. It was a cold room, lined with dark tiles, with small niches lined along the walls. In each niche lay personal objects, a watch, a set of dentures, a crumpled letter, and beneath each item was a circular hole that seemed to spit shadows. In the center stood a metal altar that resembled dental instruments, but arranged like offerings. There were also symbols engraved in the stone, the same spiral from the mask's embroidery, a path that coiled inward. By the time she heard the sound, it was too late. There was a presence in the room, something old and damp. Dr. Henry stood there without his mask, and his face was both human and profoundly wrong, his eyes deeper, his mouth with lips too dry, forming a smile that didn't seem to belong to him. "You heard the city," he said, as if mourning and praising at once. "It is hungry." He explained with a voice that oscillated between gentleness and the whisper of a nightmare that for a long time the office had been a portal. The people who came asked for the removal of pain and memories. They offered their mouths as keys, and on the other side there was something that demanded sacrifice, not blood, but presence, the flesh of memory, what remains after a person surrenders to relief. "It's an ancient trade," he explained. "Teeth hold what we are. Food is not just meat. It is what is left of us when we fall silent." Lina felt the ground tremble beneath her feet. Dr. Henry advanced, smooth, with gloves that no longer looked white. She tried to run, but the exit was blocked by a shadow, rising from the altar like smoke taking shape. It wasn't so much a creature as a place where nameless things gathered. There were whispers, voices that sounded like phrases said by those who had been taken. "Forgive me. It doesn't hurt anymore. Bring them." The shadow reached out an arm of smoke and touched Lina's face. Instead of fear, she felt a coldness that pulled memories from her. The first time she smiled without meaning to, the taste of her mother's milk, the sound of an old argument. Each memory ripped a thread of color from her, and the presence grew more solid. At the last moment, as the spiral seemed to consume her, Lina saw something that made her courage flare. In one niche, an object flashed. It was her brother's watch, its face cracked. It pulsed. Light came from within the shadow like from a wound. Without thinking, she grabbed the watch. There was a tug. Dr. Henry screamed as if a drill had snapped. The shadow hesitated, and a crack tore through the air. Lina pulled with all her might. The memories trying to be absorbed by that mouth crumbled into dust. The watch came with her, and light exploded like a luminous breath that swallowed the chamber. When the mist cleared, Dr. Henry lay on the floor, his smile melting into human scratches. The shadow had retreated, but not without whispering promises of its return. "The city will always be hungry." Lina ran up the stairs, following the street as if every step were ripping stones from her body. At the door, the cool night air was a bite of life. Lina's brother was sitting in the kitchen, dressed in his usual clothes. "Where have you been?" he asked, as if he had only gone to the bakery. He vaguely remembered a strange dream. He had felt light, as if his pains had been taken away. Lina didn't explain. Instead, she handed him the watch and clenched her hands around it until her knuckles turned white. She went back to the street and found neighbors at their windows, their eyes glazed. That clinic sign was still there, pale and shimmering. The next morning, the office was closed. There were no signs of a break-in. The police, called once more, found only clean instruments and an empty swivel chair. Dr. Henry was gone. They say he left the city like someone moving their practice. But the niches in the basement had leaked something into the earth. The gardens around the clinic sprouted twisted shoots that grew in spirals. The town learned to look carefully. When someone needed a fix, They checked 2 or 3 offices before entering. People began to speak softly about the teeth that guard things, secrets that, if offered to the first sympathetic smile, could feed shadows. Lina took up a vigilance that never left her. Whenever someone booked an appointment at the office at the end of the street, she appeared on the opposite bench, with cold hands and ready eyes. At night sometimes she would walk past that street and see, in the glass of the closed clinic, a glow that resembled a smile. It wasn't human light, it was something more ancient. Lina knew that what they had cut wasn't dead, it was merely sated for a time. The watch on her brother's wrist continued to tick, the hands turning like teeth in a gear that guards time. And in the mouths of the city there was now a new caution. There is no relief without a price, and not every smile is just a smile. When the full moon appeared, someone claimed to have heard, coming from the direction of the office, a whisper that wasn't human, repeating with an old and patient hunger, "Bring me smiles, bring me memories, I only want to taste them again." Lina closed the windows. She clutched the silverware in the drawers. And she waited, because a hunger like that quickly learns to find new paths.